Joan of Arc's story begins in the small village of Domremy, France, in the early 15th century. Born around 1412 to humble parents, Joan was an unlikely candidate for greatness. She was a peasant girl with no formal education, but from a young age, she claimed to have heard voices she believed to be saints guiding her. These voices, she later insisted, came from Saint Michael, Saint Catherine, and Saint Margaret. They told her that she was chosen to save France, which was in the grip of a devastating war. At the time, France was embroiled in the 100 Years' War, a brutal conflict between the Kingdom of France and England, with both sides vying for control of French territory. The situation was dire for the French, as the English had successfully captured much of northern France, including Paris. The legitimate heir to the throne, Charles VII, was struggling to gain control of his kingdom and had lost most of his land. Joan's vision of a divine mission sparked something extraordinary. At just 16 years old, Joan approached Charles VII and convinced him that she was the one chosen by God to lead the French army to victory. She promised to help him reclaim his throne and expel the English from France. Though many initially dismissed her as a delusional peasant girl, Charles was desperate. He allowed her to accompany the French army, and in 1429, Joan's presence proved to be nothing short of miraculous. Under her leadership, the French forces achieved a major victory at the Siege of Orleans, a turning point in the war. Joan's courage and conviction were undeniable. She inspired the troops and gave them hope. Her leadership helped secure the coronation of Charles VII as King of France in Reims, a moment that was symbolic of the turning tide in the war. Joan, once an unknown peasant girl, had now become a national hero. However, Joan's rise to power was not without its detractors. While the French people rallied behind her, the English and their French allies saw her as a threat to their ambitions. Despite the overwhelming support for her among the common people, the nobility and clergy were suspicious of her, particularly her unorthodox behavior, her claims of divine guidance, her military prowess, and her refusal to follow traditional gender roles. The same people who had initially embraced her as a symbol of hope would soon turn against her. Joan's success was short-lived. Despite her remarkable achievements, the fortunes of war turned once more against the French. After Charles VII's coronation, Joan continued to fight for French independence, but by 1430, she was captured by the Burgundians, allies of the English, at Compiègne. Her capture marked the beginning of her tragic downfall. The English, determined to break Joan's spirit and discredit her, quickly took her into custody. Joan's enemies, many of whom were part of the French aristocracy, saw an opportunity to destroy her and undermine the legitimacy of Charles VII. They did not see her as a saint or hero, but as a politically dangerous figure whose influence could disrupt the fragile political balance. Joan's imprisonment was a brutal one. She was locked in a small, damp cell, chained and isolated from the outside world. The English, however, saw her as a valuable pawn, and they orchestrated a trial aimed at discrediting her and using her as a tool of propaganda. The trial was not about justice, it was about politics. The English sought to prove that Joan's visions were mere delusions, that she had used witchcraft, and that she was guilty of heresy and blasphemy. The trial was conducted by a church court, but it was heavily influenced by the political climate of the time. Joan's trial was a farce. She was interrogated relentlessly, often in ways that sought to break her spirit. The questions were designed to trap her, to force her into confessing to crimes she had not committed. Yet, Joan, who had been so sure of her divine mission, refused to yield. She stood firm in her beliefs, insisting that she had been guided by the voices of saints. But the English, desperate to discredit her and remove her influence from the war, would not allow her to escape. Joan's defiance in the face of her captors only fueled the determination of her accusers. They accused her of heresy, witchcraft, and cross-dressing, claiming that she had violated the social and religious norms of the time. The charge of wearing men's clothing, a result of her military role, was particularly damning. Joan's refusal to wear the traditional dress of a woman was used as evidence of her rebellious spirit and her defiance of both the church and the monarchy. After months of interrogation and a show trial that lasted for several weeks, Joan was found guilty of heresy and sentenced to death. The English were not simply punishing her for her defiance, they were making an example of her. Her execution would send a clear message to anyone who dared to challenge the English or the authority of the Church. Joan of Arc's final moments unfolded on May 30, 1431, in Rouen, France. The execution was set to be carried out in the public square, a spectacle for all to witness. Joan was brought to the stake, where she was bound and prepared for the ultimate punishment. The English, who had orchestrated her trial and sentencing, were eager to see her silenced once and for all. As she stood at the stake, Joan, once a young girl who had led armies and inspired a nation, was now facing death with courage and resolve. She had been offered a chance to save herself. If she recanted her claims and admitted guilt, she would be spared. But Joan, who had been so sure of her divine mission, refused to back down. She stood firm in her faith, knowing that death was the price she would pay for her unyielding devotion to her cause. As the flames began to rise around her, Joan called out. Her last words were, "Jesus, Jesus." The flames consumed her, and she was burned at the stake. The crowd, which had gathered to watch the execution, was filled with a mixture of emotions. Some felt pity for the young girl who had been so ruthlessly condemned, while others saw her as a heretic who had gotten what she deserved. But for Joan, it did not matter. She had lived and died by her convictions. Joan of Arc's execution marked the end of her life, but it was not the end of her story. Over the next few decades, public opinion began to shift. In 1456, a posthumous retrial was held, and Joan was exonerated of all charges. The Church, recognizing the injustice of her execution, officially declared her a martyr. In 1920, she was canonized as a saint by the Catholic Church. Joan of Arc, once a symbol of heresy and rebellion, became a saint, revered by the Church and the people of France. Her death, once seen as a tragic end to a woman who had defied the world, became the beginning of her legacy. Joan of Arc's story is one of inspiration, courage, and unwavering belief. Her life and death became a symbol of resistance, and her martyrdom cemented her place as one of history's most iconic figures. She is remembered not just for her role in the 100 Years' War, but for the strength of her character and the depth of her faith. In the end, Joan of Arc's life was a testament to the power of conviction. Her final moments, spent at the stake, were not the end of her legacy but the beginning of her transformation into a symbol of hope and faith for generations to come. Her story has endured for centuries, inspiring countless individuals to stand firm in their beliefs, no matter the cost. Joan of Arc, the peasant girl who led an army and changed the course of history, remains a figure whose courage and determination continue to inspire the world today.